welcome back to the One Room at a Time podcast. I'm your host, Atticus LeBlanc, CEO of PadSplit, and we are back for part 2 of our conversation with Alex Horowitz, the director of the Housing Policy Initiative for Pew Charitable Trusts. Alex, thanks again for being here.
Glad to be here with you.
All right, well, let's jump right back in. I want to continue the conversation a little around policy and trends and just a look towards the future. So first thing is, are you seeing real momentum at the state or local level when it comes to housing reform? And specifically, what are you most encouraged by in terms of what cities and states are experimenting with right now, and who's really leading the way?
I think part of what's exciting is that we can now see the outcomes of some of the earlier reforms, and they are absolutely working as intended. So, if we were having this conversation 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I would say, look, every analyst out there agrees that what's going on is the shortage is driving costs. And if you remove regulatory barriers, make it easier to build more homes, then we're going to get more homes and affordability will improve. But, we didn't really have the data in a real world sense to see it happening. You needed really econometric models to create these synthetic scenarios and natural experiments where you're looking for variation. Well, now we just got the data back. Minneapolis has gone 9 years with almost no rent increases in the city. You go back to 2017, the median rent in Minneapolis was around $1,400. Here we are at the start of 2026. The median rent in Minneapolis is barely over $1,400.
And what changed? For folks who don't know the Minneapolis model.
First, in 2015, they eliminated all parking mandates for buildings under 50 units, and they cut in half their parking mandates for buildings over 50 units. Then, at the start of 2020, they began allowing mid-rise apartment buildings by right on all commercially zoned land in the city, on all commercial corridors. And they started allowing high-rise apartment buildings around all transit stops as well. And then in 2021, they eliminated all parking mandates completely in the city. They made some other changes too, but the other changes were not decisive. It was really the parking and the by right apartments that were decisive. Once they began allowing apartments by right, then the request for variances from builders dropped. I believe it was 72% year over year.
Wow.
Because you could just build.
Sounds like government cost savings too.
Oh, absolutely. That's a cost savings for builders. And look, there's more they could do to peel back regulatory barriers further and make it easier to build. But the fact that they made those changes unleashed a wave of housing. From 2017 to 2022, they were producing housing at triple the rate the rest of Minnesota.
Wow.
Per capita. And that held down rents. So they've really gone 9 years with barely any rent increases. In 2017, to afford the median rent in Minneapolis, you had to earn 80% of the area median income. By 2024, you only had to earn 67% of the area median income. That's a big improvement in affordability.
Yeah, that's impressive results.
Austin, Texas is another. Austin has about 1 million people, and they have been adding housing at the fastest rate of any large city. They have also made it easier to build. They've added some overlays where you can build apartments as a matter of right, so automatically. They've eliminated their parking minimums. They're one of the few cities that had a restriction on how many unrelated people could live together, and they removed it altogether. So they no longer have restrictions on how many unrelated people can live together. They allow accessory dwelling units. They've reduced their minimum lot size. It was 5,750 square feet. Now it's 1,800 square feet. They're allowing 3 homes per lot. They have cut their permitting times sharply. So inflation adjusted, rents in Austin have fallen by 25% in the last 3.5 years. It's just a staggering improvement.
Sounds pretty strong.
Yeah, it's a staggering improvement in affordability, and it's coming from the fact that they're adding so much housing, mostly apartments, but they're allowing homes on small lots as well with their new minimum lot size reform. and the new homes just cost less because homes on small lots cost less than homes on big lots. Houston, Texas was the first big city to cut their minimum lot size sharply. They went from 5,000 square feet to 1,400 square feet. They have gotten 80,000 small lot homes out of that reform, and homes on small lots cost much less than homes on big lots.
So like
in a subset that we studied, on research we commissioned from Jake Wegman and colleagues at University of Texas at Austin, the homes they studied on small lots cost 38% less
of course,
than homes on big lots, even though they're family-sized townhouses.
What kills me here, though, Alex, is, I mean, you hear from so many local officials that, well, we don't know the answers, right? Or they don't, nothing has been proven, or we don't know what to do. I mean, Houston, I feel like, has been the poster child of this: you create supply to meet demand, and you have lower rent growth and housing cost growth over, gosh, I mean, how many decades? How can do we just have officials who have their heads buried in the sand, or what's like? How do you reconcile that? I mean, this is pretty unequivocal.
Look, not everybody studies housing policy all day, and
That's fair. That's fair.
People do a lot of things. But hey, look, Houston's the fourth biggest city in the U.S.,
Yeah.
and their median rent is lower than the U.S. median rent. They've got the lowest homelessness rate of any big city in Houston. So, yeah, look, there's a lot of evidence out there, but people are doing other things. Raleigh, North Carolina was seeing rents rise quickly. Then they enacted a series of local reforms. They made it easy to build apartments around transit. They cut their minimum lot size to allow townhouses in parts of the city. They're allowing duplexes on more lots. They dealt with parking. They curbed their parking mandates too. And so rents had been rising quickly. And then as soon as those reforms took effect, housing production shot up. And the number of units permitted went up about 60% after those reforms. And rents had been growing fast, and then they started growing slowly. Instead, homelessness had been rising and then started falling. Spokane, Washington has seen some affordability improvements since they enacted strong reforms locally. Florida passed one of the strongest laws in the country to allow apartments on commercially zoned land in 2023. In the last not even 2.5 years, they've issued 52,000 permits for new apartments under that law. California, accessory dwelling units were rare in California until their new law took effect in 2017. And now they're getting more than 20,000 accessory dwelling units a year in California. So we absolutely see that policies like this work. In New York State, the jurisdictions with the slowest rent growth are just those that are adding the most housing. And the jurisdictions with high rent growth are those that aren't adding much housing. So this is pretty straightforward, but
make it legal,
look,
make it easy.
Data's gotten better too. Go ahead.
So make it legal, make it easy. They will come.
I think that's right.
Right?
And there are concerns about supply chains and interest rates and other factors, but at the end of the day, state and local policy just dominate all of that.
Yeah. So state and local policy is one thing, but then you have the sacrosanct fire code, right? Fire code is entirely about safety, right? But let's talk about the intersection and safety versus outcomes, and how some of the fire codes intersect with housing costs overall, feasibility, but also whether they're actually designed around safety and what those outcomes really look like.
So we see that we've got the zoning code that touches land use and what can be built where. You can have a single family house here, but you're not allowed to have a duplex. You can have a 5-story office building there, but you can't have a 5-story apartment building. And zoning is what causes those issues. But then we've got the building code, and sometimes a separate fire code as well. And that is supposed to govern purely safety and reduce fire risk. But we saw that there actually wasn't that much research on outcomes of building codes. And we got interested in this issue at first because some states started looking at allowing one stairway for small apartment buildings instead of requiring two. Going into the 2023 legislative session, no states had addressed the building code to look at whether they could allow one stairway for small apartment buildings instead of mandating two, which was traditional in the US. Now 14 states have passed some kind of law about allowing one stairway for small apartment buildings instead of requiring two, whether it's an enabling statute or a study bill or simply legalizing it outright.
Now why
That's
is
just in the last three
just
sessions.
real quick, Alex? Like, why is one stair versus two important?
So in most of the world, small apartment buildings are built with one stairway. I'm talking really about 4, 5, and 6-story apartment buildings. And that means you can have one stairway and the units surround that stairway, so everybody is near the stairs. And also apartments can be bigger and they can have light on multiple sides. And in the US, the way our building codes work, which are not federal, they're adopted usually at the state level, sometimes the local level, is that we require 2 stairways and a corridor connecting both of those stairways on every level of the building. That means then you can only have apartments on one side of the corridor. And so we get a lot of studios and one bedrooms, but we also have a lot of wasted expensive space in that big corridor and the second stairway. Stairways have gotten really expensive to build in apartment buildings. After kitchens and bathrooms, they are the most expensive part of an apartment building at this point. And so we found in joint research with the Center for Building in North America, led by Stephen Smith, is that if you allow one stairway instead of requiring 2 for a small apartment building, not only does that save you on land costs and being able to fit an apartment building on a small lot or above a store, it actually reduces your construction costs by about 6 to 13%. That's a big cost savings. And that means that all of these apartment buildings that weren't viable before are now viable. It also means you can get family-sized units instead of mostly studios and one bedrooms, because you can arrange them in any configuration around the stairway and get multiple bedrooms and light on multiple sides. So this is an area we've seen a lot of interest from state policymakers and in some instances local policymakers too.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't thought about the light thing, just that, I mean, in a single stair scenario, you can have windows on both sides of the building, whereas I guess in other cases, it's not necessarily common. What have been the outcomes in terms of actual safety, though, Alex?
So working with Center for Building in North America, we hand-coded every fire death for the last almost 12 years in the 2 U.S. cities that have allowed single-stair buildings for decades, New York City and Seattle. Single-stair buildings had a fire death rate in New York City that was the same as in other types of housing. And there were only 3 fire deaths in those buildings, and none of them were related to egress from the building at all. And in Seattle, we hand-coded every fire death in the city, and there were no fire deaths related to egress from the building in single-stair buildings. So we can say with confidence that there was not a single fire death in either city over the entire 12-year period we studied due to the lack of a second stair in single-stair buildings. In New York City, there were over 4,400 of them. That inspired us to take a look at fire safety overall, because this is an area that hasn't had a lot of empirical research on outcomes of building codes. And so we looked at all of the fire deaths in the US in 2023. And the fire death rate in modern apartment buildings, meaning those built since 2000, was less than 1/6 the fire death rate of single-family homes or pre-2000 apartments. So right now, based on meetings I've been in with building code officials, fire officials, and what we see happening around the country, is that sometimes new apartment buildings don't get built, or they get too expensive to build because of concerns about fire safety. But in fact, that's counterproductive and ends up raising the fire death rate, because new apartment buildings are by far the safest type of housing. They have a fire death rate that's less than 1/6 all other housing. The problem isn't that new apartment buildings are dangerous, it's that they're only 7% of the housing stock.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing that I'm thinking about is as you're walking through this in terms of safety outcomes, Alex, is the risk of death from being homeless, right? I mean, and I'm not sure if you guys have ever looked at that or if any researchers have, but uh, if you look at housing supply relative to the risk of homelessness, and then you think about just the risk of death overall from being homeless compared to the risk of dying in a fire, I have to imagine it's probably orders of magnitude higher risk from being homeless. But is that in anyone's purview? I mean, are there fire code officials or really anyone who is really kind of taking that bigger picture view?
I think it's an appropriate lens for policymakers to use in thinking about trade-offs and thinking about safety and well-being. Homelessness is absolutely deadly. That is true from very direct causes like hypothermia and people who freeze to death outside during the winter, and also from indirect causes such as people who are not able to keep up with a stable medical routine and get health care, and also the additional risks that somebody faces when they don't have housing or they don't have stable housing. And so we're absolutely seeing excess mortality from homelessness that could be alleviated by removing some of the regulatory barriers that are blocking
Yeah.
more housing and that are blocking housing that people can afford, and making it easier for people to get into housing. Because exactly, we think about the risks that people face from, right, for example, fire death, but not in a way that accounts for trade-offs, and actually not in a way that accounts for fire fatalities either, because the safest type of housing is the type that we're often blocking, because newer housing is dramatically safer than older housing.
Yeah.
But the median age of rental housing in the U.S. is 43 years old. That's the oldest it's ever been.
Yeah. Yeah. And the economic impact as well. So lots to unpack there. Well, Alex, in spite of looking at some of these details that are not exactly refreshing, as we talk about homeless deaths compared to others, what are some reasons for optimism, and what are the policy shifts, cultural changes? You had highlighted some of them in the last episode, but what makes you feel like we're finally turning a corner on housing, if we are?
I think that there's broadly a recognition that we don't have, just a housing crisis, which is kind of a vague term that could mean anything. We've got a shortage of homes, and regulatory barriers are the main reason why. Whether a home is defined as a room or as an accessory dwelling unit or a townhouse or a duplex or a high-rise apartment or a single-family home, we just don't have enough of them. And that consensus has spread out from kind of experts across the ideological spectrum into federal and state and some local policymakers as well. And the fact that this has support across the political spectrum, I think, is really good news also. A few years ago, I tended to hear people say, well, if we allow more homes, that'll help people who are kind of upper middle class, and that's good, I guess, and people maybe who are middle class, but it really won't do anything for people who are struggling or working class or poor because they need subsidies.
Sure.
We're seeing that conversation move and recognizing that regulatory barriers that create housing shortages are highly regressive and they hurt low-income tenants most. We've seen in cities, in metro areas that make it easier to build and allow more homes, rents are falling the most for older, naturally affordable apartments. So allowing enough homes for everybody benefits the people who get priced out from scarcity.
Yeah.
And we're seeing policymakers across the spectrum recognize that. We've never seen more action on housing at the state level, especially, but definitely some at the local level. And also even Congress has gotten into the mix. A pretty good housing package, Road to Housing, passed the Senate Banking Committee unanimously, and a partially overlapping package passed House Committee almost unanimously. And if that package passed to remove some of the regulatory barriers to housing and make funding a little more efficient, that would be good news as well, but it's rare that you can make progress at the federal, the state, and the local level, and that it stays bipartisan, which it largely has. And so I think that is a real cause for optimism. The fact that we kind of know how to go forward and we know what the solutions are takes away some of that uncertainty.
Love it. Well, here for deregulation. And yeah, that is reason for optimism. Well, Alex, let's wrap up here. We need to move to rapid fire Q&A. And so if you can, let's try to answer these in one sentence. One daily habit that keeps you grounded.
I like to keep my eye on the prize and think about what's important and focus on that.
All right. What are you currently reading?
Ooh, what am I currently reading? I gotta say, I tend to read mostly about housing policy.
As everyone should.
So most of what I've read has either been about housing policy or state capacity. Recently, I mentioned Stuck by Yoni Applebaum. I thought that was a terrific one that I just finished up. Yeah. And I enjoyed Why Nothing Works by Mark Dunkelman this year, which is also about state capacity and efficacy of government. And got to plug Recoding America by Jennifer Palka about how government works. And those were all winners in my book.
Those are some great recs. What is the biggest misconception people have about housing affordability?
I think that there's a perception that subsidies are what is needed, and that housing problems are about spending and not spending enough, and that is not what's going on. The places that have improved housing affordability the most are those that have made it the easiest to build and removed impediments to adding housing.
Love it. If you could wave a magic wand and instantly do one thing to fix housing affordability, what would it be?
So I think the single most effective policy that we've seen is allowing apartments by right on commercially zoned land. That is the single policy that has made the biggest difference at the city level. And we're just starting to see states pick that up in the last couple of years. That's probably the single best lever to pull, but really that's kind of one of many that is needed to get housing affordability back to where it was historically.
Yeah, that doesn't even seem like one that's politically controversial at all either.
It's not that controversial. It doesn't touch existing single-family blocks, which is something that
well, dang it, Alex, we
makes
want to keep it spicy
policies a little
here,
harder to pass. So that has been, it's gained pretty wide support in states. But look, only 15 have done some variation of them, and some of them aren't that strong. So we've still got a ways to go.
Good stuff. Well, Alex, thank you for joining us.
Hey, great to be here.
And for the work that you're doing, really bringing clarity, data, and practicality to one of the most complex challenges that we are facing. For our listeners, you can learn more about Alex's research at pew.org/housing policy, and we will include links to his reports in the show notes. And please be sure to subscribe to One Room at a Time wherever you listen or watch, and tell us who you think we should talk to next. You can find us at padsplit.com/podcast. And until next time, everyone, thank you for joining us. One Room at a Time.